Jock Gilchrist is here.
Climate change is an issue like no other in terms of its scope and its urgency. The best time to do something about it was yesterday, and there are entire cadres of people working on this problem: activists, engineers, academics, youth, and other leaders. I consider myself part of this crowd, as many people in this room likely do. So given the urgency of the problem and the amount of energy dedicated to it, I've often wondered, why haven't we solved the problem yet? Is there something the climate movement could do to be more effective? As a researcher at the Center for Climate Protection, I actually had a chance to investigate those questions. And I think we have an interesting way of framing the problem. We've couched it in a concept called theory of change. So to design a theory of change, you start at the end and work backwards to the present moment. You fill in the steps needed to get you to your desired end result as best you can, using reason and evidence as much as possible. Now, I think the interesting thing about theories of change is that everybody has one, but not everybody knows that they have one. And it turns out that that could be a problem, because with our big hearts and our compassion for the fate of the planet and all of its species, we take action that we think will make a difference. But the issue is that a lot of times these actions are based on unconscious mental models that have biases and fallacies in them. Peter Senge said that they can limit us to familiar ways of thinking and acting and affect our behavior in subtle ways. So something interesting happens when you're asked to describe your theory of change, which is that we blurt out a jumble of inconsistencies and unfounded assumptions. That's how the unconscious mind works. It's not based on reason and empirical evidence. But that's actually a really good starting point, because now that we have something out on the table, we can begin to evaluate, refine, and test it. We can discover and interrogate the assumptions we didn't know we were making. We can research past efforts that use similar strategies to see if they produce results, all with the goal of improving our chances of reaching our desired end result. So the process of refining a theory of change is illuminating and messy, but I think it's more than just a fun mental exercise. I think the fate of the climate movement depends on it. And yet, when our research group looked into theories of change in the climate movement, we found that most organizations didn't have one, or they had one that was vague and unrigorous, despite the fact that there's been good research done that talks about what works and what doesn't. So to bring this to life a bit more, I'm going to talk about how we came to create our theory of change. We started by researching some of the most common strategies that organizations and individuals pursue to see which were the most effective. So for example, individual actions is a common one. Things like taking shorter showers, turning off the lights, eating less meat, even having one less kid. These are all things you can do to reduce your personal carbon footprint. But the issue with that is, even if all of those were summed together, it still wouldn't be enough to prevent 1.5 degrees of warming. The other issue with individual actions is that it's very difficult to communicate about them properly. One Australian campaign called Climate Clever that encouraged individual actions actually ended up having 1/3 fewer people say climate change is their most important issue after the campaign was over. Another strategy we often see is awareness raising. We think people just need more information about our cause. But most campaigns don't incorporate their strategic end goal very well into their messaging, and they fail to turn awareness into action. Instead, we think that the most effective strategy is finding leverage points to create systemic change. We need to change the systems that govern societal behavior on a mass scale. Things like how we get around, how we power our stuff, and how we grow food. It should be easy to make sustainable choices. And sustainable lifestyles need to be the default choice. So, so we think that to create a better theory of change, we need to find the right levers for change. And our research sort of showed us that policy is that lever. So other strategies have their place too, like awareness raising and individual actions, but they need to also be coupled with a thrust towards structural change. And that can only be achieved through collective coordinated action. This is why Bill McKibben said that the right question isn't what can I do, it's what can we do. And so in a nutshell, that's our theory of change, is coordinated advocacy for policy solutions to turn the levers of the most effective change. So ultimately, we hope that our research into theory of change sparks a greater alignment around this particular strategy in the climate movement. But ultimately, even if we don't all agree on one unified strategy, that's okay too. If everyone took the time to articulate and improve their theory of change, that alone would produce a stronger and more effective movement, and one that's more capable of turning the talent, passion, and moral conviction of those in it into the results this planet desperately needs. Thank you.